Greetings, I'm Shad, and as you could probably tell, I love giant swords. I've already done several videos exploring kind of the mechanics of what it would be like to fight with a giant sword, the interesting limitations that would actually arise. And we came to some interesting conclusions in those videos, like the swords need to be made out of some type of super light but still really strong fantasy material. You would also need to be super strong, but interestingly, one of the things that you would also need, probably even more than super strength, is super weight to keep you grounded and not thrown off your feet when you actually use them. But if we could pretend we actually met some of those requirements, there is another question I haven't explored yet, and that is, how would you actually fight with them if you could actually use them thanks to one of these justifications? That's exactly what we're going to be exploring in this video. This thing is a beast. As you saw, much taller than your average greatsword, even historical standards. So this is a monster in terms of length and most definitely width. Interestingly though, there are some swords you can find historically that almost match this length, but they weren't meant for combat. They're called bearing swords. We believe them to be mostly ceremonial. But if you had, again, the strength to be able to use something this long, or it was made out of a magical material, okay, any one of those justified reasons, that's a question. How would you actually fight with it? Now, to match a lot of the fantasy stuff that we see in video games and other things, we've made it match the width of a lot of the fantasy ones, even though width isn't as necessary. I have a whole video where how would you want to make a two-handed sword, a giant sword, even having something this wide, so not as wide as this, but as wide as my fingers are showing here, right? It would still easily be heavy enough, depending on the width, okay? And it would have to have some measure of width in it, otherwise it would just bend and break. Again, super material, you get away with it. But even if it was just, say, yay wide, it would still be crazy heavy to get all the power you need in it. And having extra width wouldn't really be a necessity. And then you might assume, well, what if you want to block with it? It's not wide enough to block the range of a shield, but I have got another video experimenting on combining a shield and a giant sword, and I call it the Schword. It's a joke name. I think there's other names you could come up with that would be better with it. That is a giant sword that's wide enough to be used as a shield. We're not going there. We're actually looking at the more stereotypical fantasy giant swords, which usually have about this width to them. How would you fight with it? Now, just like with the one-handed sword, it's interesting to even compare or pretend and say this fantasy giant sword, if it's just as heavy as this wooden one is to me, already we got some interesting things. This is a heavy sword. This is heavier than a lot of two-handed swords. And not only is it because of the mass and overall weight, more because of the torque. Because it's so much longer, the stress I feel on my hands is pretty high. But okay, now we can pretend I either have the strength to lift something metal and it weighs as heavy as this, and then my weight is grounding me enough so I don't tip me over. So we can pretend I have that, or it's the super light material that's also really strong that makes it the same approximate weight as this wooden one is here, and so I can lift it and manipulate it as easy as I can this one. How would you fight with it? Crowd control. Big, wide swings like this. Just slash, 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 slash. And you can absolutely do this, like I'm doing it right now, and if the sword did weigh as much as this one here, you can do it, and that would be intimidating. But I'm already running into something interesting, and that is what it would be the rest position. My rest position, look, I'm resting it right here. It's not a real combat one, but because of the torque and how heavy it is on the top end, resting on the ground and then on your arm like that, it's just what I'm doing now. But in terms of standing guard rest positions, this is already really tiring. I would not want to hold this long at all. This would be terrible, honestly. By having it back in a wrath position, resting on the shoulder, this is ready to go, and already got the wind up for a big slash, okay? Before I go to the type stacks, let's explore other stances. So I did mention kind of a wrath or on the shoulder stance like this, and if it's a sharp blade, you want some type of padding or something so it doesn't cut you, of course. That would work decently enough. Holding it honestly right up vertical is pretty darn good, and you can keep it elevated. You don't need to keep it elevated too much, but there, what's interesting, because the blade is so wide, you can even rest it on the shoulder like that, and that's actually quite comfortable, and I don't need to hold all the weight on my arms anymore, and this is pretty good. Actually right there isn't bad at all. We see in video games supergiant swords a lot, and oftentimes the way that they're fought with is really bad. Like if we look at, look, I love Elden Ring, we look at the animation specifically, they're swinging it about wildly, over-swinging in a really crude, uncontrolled fashion. And I think there are ways that you would fight with it much more realistically that could still convey the weight, speed, and strength behind the strikes that look far more controlled and precise, like you've actually trained with it. Good combat. This is actually a really good position. Why is this good? Okay, sword is elevated, and so it is ready to attack right here. How? Well, one big way is just bang, just drop it. Now, if you really wanted to go hard, you go like that. You could throw your shoulder into it. Kind of like what they do in Monster Hunter. They have that giant sword where it does this big swing and the body is flying up as it hits and stuff. You could get away with that. Another way to recover, see what I did then? So when I was down, right, lifting it, leveraging it on my arm, and then pulling up like that is the way, like, much easier. It makes make it resting kind of, not center of balance, but you know what I'm doing. It's a leverage point. Adds more leverage, lift it up. I can't lift it up one hand. I literally cannot lift it up one-handed like that. But if I do this, suddenly I can much easier. So from this position, you can also push it into a sideways slash, like so, recover up. So I think this is actually one of the best. And what's interesting about that sideways slash, I was able to use my shoulder as a bit of leverage to kind of push it off into that slash that way. And so that works pretty well. Another stance, let's think about this, right? Another one might actually be something, I don't know, if you had a glove that you could hold it, something like this might actually work because, again, gloves to prevent yourself from cutting your own hand. You can rest a sword like that. You would never need to with a real sword because they're so light, but this is so heavy, right? Again, if you had the strength, you could avoid the cut with a metal glove or something like this. This is actually not bad because it gives you that extra leverage point to push off into a quick attack. Where you're there, you just push off into a slash right there. Or you could go around, get it into a wide one, and then you recover, and you're good to go. It's interesting how much I'm leveraging with my shoulder to recover. I think you would probably want to do that in combat, especially if you need to be quick. Like if it hit ground, you had an enemy there, it'd be much easier just push it there, bang it off. Wow, that's really interesting. So even in combat, where I got it here, and I leverage off my shoulder to push it into a cut, land there, then I can leverage it up, I can push it down. Wow, you incorporating the shoulder as a rest and leverage point to launch off of is really effective. I really think you could build a whole combat system around this kind of shoulder rest slash leverage, not only position, but movement style where you're there and you can push it off sideways and then you can leverage it up over that shoulder, hit, and then again, you get there, leverage over there, hit, push it there, and then we leverage it up, you can spin it around, get back on that, leverage it over that shoulder, and this is just really interesting where, you know, you have this whole movement system where you get there, and then you can push it off and just go bang, then back in position like that. That's a really intriguing style that has a lot of practical benefit because it's so long and heavy, just that extra leverage. I love it. One of the things you might have noticed is that with a lot of the experimentation I'm doing, I'm focusing a lot on slashes, and that's one of the main focuses I think you would generally end up doing because your area of attack, your threat range is huge with this thing because it's so long and you can do these big wide slashes just like we see with Montante treatises. What we can't really do with Montante are like underarm slashes because it hits the ground. You could do sideways slashes where you bring it sideways and hit up, and you could try and go sideways and hit it, but you can't let it hit the ground. Now when it comes to spinning, there are certain spins I think you could get away with a sword this large. Oftentimes you won't need to because doing like a full area attack like this, spinning and offending your back like that, right, is probably quicker than trying to do a whole like, you know, the thing they see in video games. Video games. Oh, I just damaged my castle. Thanks for visiting the Shadlands, the place to find quick and easy to watch sword-related content. This video was a supercut or clip from a larger Shadiversity video. If you'd like to see the full-length video, please click on the provided links, and I hope to see you in the future.